On Physics 101 continued. Lucero glanced at the still small form on the floor. Shit. Janet, call dispatch. Get EMS out now. Civilian down, unconscious, non-responsive, possible concussion, vitals stable. Officer needs assistance now. He felt her withdraw, heard her pull her radio from her belt and connect with the switchboard. She quietly repeated what Lucero had relayed from Charlie into the radio, turning the squelch down when the operator responded. Sir, they want to know if we've moved her at all. Lucero glanced at Charlie, who shook his head, his eyes still locked on the form on the floor. No, he whispered over his shoulder. Janet repeated that, listened for a moment and responded, then listened again before turning back to Lucero. They want to know if we think we can roll her to her side. There's a concern about possible choking. Right. He looked at Charlie, who frowned. I think I can roll her over, sir. Can you give me a hand here? Lucero gave up his post blocking the door and moved to Charlie's side, allowing Janet access to the room. Her sharp inhalation seemed loud as she was finally able to take in the scene. What are you thinking? Lucero stooped down next to Charlie, who seemed to have put himself in charge of the situation. If we turn her towards her right arm, the lens will be under her and out of the way. That would be a good opportunity to really examine the device, though. Thorne's voice coming from above and behind them was thoughtful. No, was Charlie's immediate reply. He spared a sharp glance at Janet. No, Lucero echoed. Janet just shook her head. Whatever. I've still got dispatch waiting for status. EMS is 2 minutes out. Dispatch notified the front desk. Security is ready for them. Fine. Good work. Thanks. Lucero nodded to Charlie. Let's do this. I'll turn her from her waist and legs. You lift from under her shoulder on 3. Charlie nodded. 1, 2, 3. 2 sets of hands gently turned Elise over onto her right shoulder, her hand, with the lens still in its grasp, now tucked into her chest. She reflexively pulled her knees towards her head awkwardly angled on the floor. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Charlie held her left wrist as he continued to monitor her pulse and breathing. Janet stepped back towards the door as a tinny voice came from her radio. She raised it to her head and listened for a moment, nodding to what dispatch was saying, her reply almost inaudible. There were a couple of exchanges before Janet lowered the radio. Her sigh sounded almost exasperated. Sir, they want to know if there are any changes in vitals after she was turned over. No, Lucero answered as Charlie shook his head. How long until they get here? Some kind of traffic issue, sir. ETA is still 2 minutes. Great. There was another quiet exchange between Janet and dispatch. They suggest we cover her. She's probably in shock. Does she look blue around the lips, fingers? Not from what I can see. Do we have any blankets around here? Lucero replied. Not that I'm aware of, sir. Jackets, maybe? None of the men had worn their suit coats into the interview. The consensus had been would feel less official if they were in their shirt sleeves. Yes, exclaimed Lucero, relief evident in his voice. Great, yes, jackets. My office, coat rack behind the door. Everyone left their jackets there before the interview started. Hurry. Yes, sir. They also say we should elevate our feet. Janet's voice dropped off. Fine, get the jackets. Yes, sir. Janet hurried out of the room. Charlie sat back on his heels, looking at Lucero briefly before returning his gaze to Elise. Feeling a little protective, are we? Lucero asked dryly. Charlie shrugged. Not any more so than I would be for any other civilian in this kind of situation. Sir. Lucero's humph was the only answer needed. Janet returned with an armful of men's jackets in her arms, the radio squawking in her left hand as she tried to remove one coat from the stack with the other hand. Lucero stood up and pulled his coat off the top of the stack. He gently lowered it over Elise's torso, the coat seeming to swallow the much smaller form under it. He took another coat, Farley's probably, hopefully, from Janet's arms and bent down to lift Elise's feet carefully. He slid the coat under her feet and then folded the coat over her legs, effectively elevating and covering them at the same time. Charlie flashed a grateful smile at the detective. He could just barely see Elise's chest moving up and down with her breath. His hand still held her left wrist. He could feel her pulse under his fingers like a tiny creature, alive and trapped just beneath her skin. Lucero took the last coat from Janet and draped it over Elise's legs. Any update? Janet shook her head, then lifted her radio as the speaker squawked. She listened again for a few seconds. Multi-car collision with minor injuries. Station 2's on scene. Traffic is being rerouted and cleared. ETA is now 5 minutes. Jeez, Lucero repeated, then turned back to the scene at his feet. No change, he asked. Charlie shook his head. Should we check for a head injury? Janet offered. She may have hit her head on the floor when she went down. I'm not sure if we should. Charlie's face was now more alarmed, his body stiff and back straight. I don't see any blood on the floor from where we rolled her, Lucero commented. I think we'll just leave well enough alone until EMS gets here. Charlie's posture relaxed visibly, and Lucero felt one eyebrow twitch. He hoped this wasn't going to turn into something messy here. A sound of quickly approaching feet heralded the arrival of EMS. Lucero stood up and stepped out of the room, waving the text towards him. Janet had stationed herself against the wall, out of the way, but with an unimpeded view of the proceedings. 2 techs came in, a stretcher between them. They quickly surveyed the room and the 2 forms on the floor. Charlie hadn't moved. Elise was barely visible, just her head showing from the jackets piled on top of her. The EMTs lowered the stretcher to the floor next to Elise. One tech, a young black woman, crouched down and touched Charlie on the shoulder. Thank you, officer. We can take care of it from here. Why don't you help get these coats off of her and we'll see what we've got, shall we? Her voice was a deep, rich contralto, her southern accent strong. It was a voice that was designed to soothe and comfort. Charlie knew when he was being dismissed. His fingers didn't seem to want to let go of Elisa's wrist. He set her hand down slowly and pulled his hand back. She has something in her right hand. It's her personal property. He lifted the coats up so the techs could see the lens clasped in Elisa's hand. Okay, no problem. Let's see if she's willing to give it up. I don't think she's going to. The EMT smiled reassuringly at Charlie. We won't force it if she won't let go, but it could be a safety issue. I think you'll have more of a safety issue if she wakes up and that device is not in her hands, was Lucero's response from the door. Definitely. Charlie's nod was emphatic. He was still kneeling on the floor at Elisa's side, though. He'd pulled the top coats off of her. She stood up slowly and walked around the second EMT, who was readying the stretcher, tucking it against Elisa's back and checking the straps. Vitals. A slim brown hand clasped Elisa's wrist briefly before setting it back down. Pulse 86, respiration 26. Check for pupils after we get her on the board. Ready? Ready here. Righto then. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They turned Elise up and onto the stretcher in one smooth motion, the second EMT straightening her legs as Charlie pulled the last of the jackets out from under her feet. He stepped back and watched as the straps were secured. The first EMT checked Elisa's pupils, flashing a small pen light in first one eye, then the other.